So the first thing that I think a lot of people are going to ask you, and I think they should ask is, well, we're talking about music in 2017. Why are we talking about a Greek philosopher from 300 BC?
Yeah, and you know, if we were just looking at, say, the development of music, Aristotle had a few things to say about it, but music theory has advanced so far beyond from, you know, where he or Plato or any of these other ancient people. But if we're talking about, you know, like I said, education in general and how that works, Aristotle has a lot of relevant stuff to say. You know, he points out in the Rhetoric that all teaching involves some persuasion. And you know this because we have to persuade our students that it's a good idea for them to read their textbooks, that doing assignments is a worthwhile activity, you know, that they should practice, you know. We're always engaged in some measure of persuasion. So if we have a good understanding about what works in persuasion and what's likely to go off the rails, we're going to be better teachers. You know, and then of course there's the content that you're teaching them about. You know, like part of what you talk about is what do you need to do to get gigs and to keep gigs and to have people see you as a reliable musician who they want to hire, you know, month in, month out. And that's not something that I think just comes automatically to people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's take that. A lot of students, there's working in college, but you know, doing the work and getting the grades and passing the classes. And I find in music, there comes a time where they need to be employable. So we talk about the different kinds of rhetoric with Aristotle. There's deliberative, there's judicial, and ceremonial.
Yeah.
The three main ones we talk about. Now, if I'm coming out of college as a music student and I'm trying to maybe silently convince people they should hire me, I think he talks about pathos, ethos, logos.
Yeah, the three main modes of persuasion or means of persuasion. Yeah.
So now, what there is a certain kind of rhetoric, correct? So if I'm presenting myself, what is somebody that's coming into the business? What would Aristotle say? This is what you should at least think about with those three things.
So the side that is most relevant there is deliberative rhetoric, because it's future oriented. You're trying to convince somebody that it's to their advantage, for whatever reason, to hire you. And it might be not just that you're trying to get them to hire you, but you're also making a case why you're a better person to hire than these other competitors too.
And let's make a distinction. There's a lot of things we could say, but into two things. I see two main things with musicians: a side musician who wants to get hired, and then we see the person that's writing the music and putting themselves out, and they might be trying to persuade people why they should come into their world and buy their music or hire their band to play at a club.
Yeah. So a lot of what we consider to be marketing is really, from a rhetorical perspective, deliberative rhetoric, and some of it's very manipulative. Aristotle's not counseling that you should be deceiving people or trying to just hook into just their emotions. As a matter of fact, he criticizes some of the other earlier teachers of rhetoric for just trying to push those emotional buttons, right? Which it sometimes works, but you're not going to build up a successful long-term relationship with a client over time doing that sort of thing. They'll see through it fairly quickly, because most people are smart enough to realize when they've been manipulated.
Right?
Later,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
So yeah, if you're trying to make the case why you should be hired, you're going to need some attention to the dimension of pathos, of emotion. So some really basic things like don't tick the client off, right? It helps to understand how anger works so you don't inadvertently offend the client, especially if you're edgy, right?
The client, or maybe a band leader in this case, right?
Yeah, and another important emotion, fear. Sometimes you can play on fear and say, well, there's that fear of missing out, FOMO, and you might appeal to that. But there's also, you don't want a venue to think, oh, I don't know if we bring this guy in, is he going to start a riot, right? Then they're not going to hire you. Or another fear, if we hire this guy, will he actually show up on time? Maybe he won't, and we're afraid that he won't be reliable. And there's other emotions that fit in there too. And so you can get, some, it's important to have some attention to that. But then there's this whole dimension of logos, and that is how you articulate a real argument. When you're writing a cover letter to somebody and you're saying, you should hire me, or you should look at my product, or I'd like you, when you're writing a pitch, you're engaging in logos. And what really ties them together for Aristotle is that middle dimension of ethos, which means something like, habit or character. And he says that's the most powerful means of persuasion. So, when you've got a track record over time, that's building ethos, right? When you portray yourself, whether honestly or dishonestly, because maybe it's not the case, as somebody who's reliable and who really wants to do a good show for the audience and for the venue, or if you're doing studio work, you really want the product to be a high quality product and you're not that concerned about your ego, that's ethos. And that is something, it's kind of hard to fake, over long term. And it persuades so much better than just emotions or even rational argument,
So that's interesting. So habit, what this person tends to do or what you show people you tend to do. Isn't part of that too maybe how you present yourself? You think in the music business, I know that, going to certain gigs, if I showed up to a blues gig and didn't have the right guitar or the right amp or the right, if I showed up dressed as an 80s AOR rocker, that might not get me, if I was going after a blues gig, that might, and that could be another thing, that could be contempt too towards the people that you show up. So I think this is also kind of, we have online such a big deal these days. So is that part of the ethos too, is kind of like they go to your website or they go to your Facebook page?
I think so, you may be providing some in the copy on your webpage, you might be providing some argument, but you are primarily showing who you are and what kind of person you are. And I think, some people in creative things want to say, I'm an individual and you can't categorize me, man. Well, that's not true at all. And good musicians understand this, that people are types, and you want to be seen as having certain qualities that you do share in common with other people that they like.
So in essence, I know that Aristotle usually talks about, when he talks about deliberation, he's talking about, it's either you're talking and trying to convince somebody, but there's always onlookers, there's an audience.
Yes.
So in essence, what people should think about in the music business is, it's not about like, hey, I need to put a million pictures of myself and I think you mentioned the word ego. But there's a thing about connecting with some kind of audience. If you want to connect with an audience, these are things you should think about.
I think you're right. And there's going to be different ways to do that. If you think about some of the people who've made a real dent in things through YouTube, for example. One example is, I forget her name exactly. It's a Russian name, gone wild, and she plays heavy metal stuff, but on like a harp. And
I know who you're talking about.
No, on the piano. That's right. She plays it on the piano. There's other people who do things on the harp. And if you go to her YouTube channel, there's a sort of consistency that's built up through the performances, right?
So to do with maybe her look, maybe her
how she presents herself. And then if she put like copy, and of course she wouldn't do this. If you don't like my stuff, screw you, right? Okay, that might work for certain types of performers because it fits that ethos. Think about the original punk people, right? It was all about screw you, But that's not gonna work for most things today. There's gonna be kind of a jarring effect there.
Right, especially if, and that was a scene. People hung out at CBGB's in New York.
Yeah.
But now, if you visit somebody's page and somebody's yelling at you already, that might,
unless you're really into yelling, and I suppose there's probably a niche for that,
So, in Aristotle, and you just said before, he's never saying, he would never say, don't pretend to be somebody you're not, but you might want to think about it. I have this great story, I don't know go ahead.
Be your best self.
Be your best self.
Be the self that you actually aspire to be.
Yes.
There's a difference between that and trying to fool people into thinking that you're, somebody, let's say you decide, I'm going to be the next Jimmy Page. So I need to look exactly like Jimmy Page, right?
Which is interesting because you do see that, anybody that copies the Prince look, well, that's super identifiable.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you have to be conscious of that. I don't know if that would work for to your benefit. Yeah, an individual, but not one you can describe yourself.
If it works, you can find yourself usually to a niche, sort of like tribute bands. Tribute bands are clearly trying to, and they do this very well, to replicate what's best in the ethos of the band that they're imitating. So they don't, for example, usually, if people in the band had drug problems, they don't usually we gotta get hooked on the same drug. They wear the costumes, they talk like the people, they try to interact with the audience the way the people do, and provide a similar sound. Now sometimes there's a little bit of a twist, you think about the female tribute bands for the Iron Maidens or
Arrow Chicks.
Yeah, Judas Priestess, I think, is another.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, they're not going to look exactly like the band, but they're adapting. And what are they adapting? They're adapting ethos.
Exactly. All right. Yeah. And then, so there's kind of the thing they should think about first of all is how am I presenting myself? This is deliberation.
Yeah.
And that's something I didn't think about. I think this is true for the professional, maybe even in their 30s or 40s, that needs to consider this and maybe make a boost to their career a little bit.
Yeah.
How you present.
I mean, there's deliberation with yourself and perhaps with other people whose opinions you value about how do I want to present myself? What's best in what I have to offer? And then there's deliberation where you are making a case to whoever is going to be the client. The place that's going to bring you in for a gig, maybe an agent that you want to start representing you, fellow musicians who you want to play with, You
exactly.
make a case to them why should they play with you rather than somebody else.
And think about how you're going to do that. Now that's really interesting because coming up, you're actually giving a lecture on relationships and what Aristotle, and I haven't studied so much of that yet, but that's from the Nico McCain ethics, right?
That is, yeah.
So maybe I can ask you, because this is very important, relationships in the music business.
Yes.
And you're going to be dealing with lawyers, club owners, band leaders. If Bruno Mars calls, well, there's a distinction between that and then if you're in a band.
Yeah.
So if it's kind of like you're in Dawkins. Well, that's Don Dawkins' band.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
even if you're George Lynch.
Even if you're George Lynch, exactly. So, do you think, would Aristotle say, in dealing with all these different peoples, people that you deal with in the music business, like I said, agents, club owners, should there be a distinction? Should you be clear on what your relationship is with them?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the strengths of Aristotle's treatment of what he calls friendship, in Greek it's philia, which is a little bit wider than what we call friendship, is that he breaks it down into different types, and the different types are based on different fundamental goods that are orienting the relationship. So, the highest type is pretty rare. You don't have a ton of friends who you know inside and out, and you like, you feel affection towards on account of who they are because you've gotten to know them. Aristotle has this great saying, you need to eat a bucket of salt with that person, meaning you got to have a lot of meals before you can say that you really know somebody, right? And so being in the music business, think about what goes on a tour bus. You get to know people pretty well when you go on tour. And a lot of what you may get to know you might not like, right? But sometimes you find people that you really do like. And so that's that highest form of friendship. But that's only possible for people who are actually, if they're not genuinely like good or what Aristotle would call virtuous, at least they're trying to be that way, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got friendships of pleasure. And this is a lot of our friendships. A lot of dating relationships and sexual relationships are like this. You're not necessarily thinking that this person is your soulmate, but you enjoy spending time with them. It could be that you enjoy what they give you, or it could be that you enjoy some activity together, like people who like hanging out with each other, right? Or like we like talking about metal.
Yes,
there's a pleasant activity going on there, and it doesn't have to necessarily be virtuous, in the sense of like, oh, we're plumbing the depths of what metal is or anything like that. It can just be fun, right?
Absolutely.
We compare notes about. I saw this show and they did this, and that's fun. So Aristotle says don't mix up those two kinds of relationships, and this is where a lot of people go wrong, especially in like romantic relationships. Especially a lot of younger people who don't have a lot of experience. Each relationship has to be this soulmate relationship, or with friendships, right? You like hanging out with somebody. That doesn't mean that you're going to take a bullet for them. Because they're the center. The friendship is the center of your world, and then we have a whole range of other relationships. Aristotle says that are fundamentally about usefulness, where you don't really like the person, for their own sake, because you don't know them that well,
right?
And they may not even be that fun to be with, but you get something out of it. So they invite you to parties, and you like going to parties. And you go, and when you go, if it's a fancy party, of course, you bring your flowers to the hostess and your bottle of wine. If it's more downscale, you bring your 6-pack, and as you walk in, you shake their hand and say something nice, right?
Yeah.
And then go do what you want to do, right? And Aristotle would say that's fine. And a lot of business relationships fall into that class. And where people get into trouble, especially in creative activities, is trying to make relationships of one sort into another kind of relationship because they feel like they need to do that. Because there's like a pressure to do it, right?
Right.
Sometimes there's manipulation too. And you want to be attuned to when somebody's trying to convince you that they're really, really your friend. Like you think about sleazy managers from the 70s who went off with all the band's profits.
That's right.
That's just a relationship of utility, but the band thought that they were, they had this virtuous person who was going to take care of all their interests. A lot of bands got themselves in trouble that way.
But I see that, I see that on the local level. I definitely see it in people in their late teens, early 20s, where I see it online all the time. People approach, hey, I heard your music, you're absolutely amazing. You seem like a great person, let's meet up, we're pals. And then the lines get blurred where I feel like the person's preying on the artist.
Yeah.
I mean, it can work either way. But it's kind of, what I guess what they're trying to do is blur the lines between I'm your pal, you can trust me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something that...
I think there's another dynamic that's kind of similar to that too, which is, so we all get 24 hours a day, period, right?
Yeah.
There's no way we can get any more than that because of the way time works. And once we've used it, it's gone. Now, when you become more popular, you are influencing more people. More people are responding to you, right? So you play a big arena instead of just a small dive bar. Now there's potentially, let's say they didn't even film what you were doing.
Yeah.
There's potentially, 1,000 people who are saying, "Oh man, this is really great." And if you've been writing the lyrics, now they've got something they can relate to. Guitarists, of course, have their own kind of thing going. You get up there and you're playing the ultimate instrument, right? and so all these people, I have this happen with YouTube as well. A lot of these people, it doesn't cross their mind that if you're giving half an hour to them, you don't have that half an hour to practice, to sleep, to engage with another fan, to follow up with an email about something, and we're often reluctant to remind people of that because it feels like then we're not being authentic or something like that, right? But really, we're doing people a favor when we're straight with them, and we say, "Well, I'm really glad you like the album. You maybe got 5 minutes to talk with them, or where are you from?
Yeah.
And then it's okay to say to them, listen, I don't have time to keep talking with you. It's been great meeting you, and I think a lot of people have trouble with that. It took me a while myself.
Well, it's true. I guess you get in a position of maybe feeling guilt.
Yeah. And there are some people who will try to make you feel guilty about that too. So you gotta be able to tell that, and I think that takes a little bit of experience.
I would say for me it was definitely experience, but it's not something I considered. I just find like a lot of the Aristotle stuff, maybe stuff that over time, I kind of know that.
Yeah.
But then I started to find out as I started to get into it that I walk around and consider it, and it takes on a whole new meaning. So kind of being aware of what's going on, maybe in that situation where you're thinking, okay, I just did a show, there might be 20, 30 people that want to talk. Yeah. You can't talk to them all. Well, it's kind of like why...
This is like Aristotle's problem of how many people can you be friends with, that he talks about in the Nicomachean Ethics.
Oh, that's interesting.
You can have a few very close friends, and then you've got your family. That's a whole different matter that he discusses. And he does think you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family, right? And then you can have a lot of friends that you have these less deep relationships with, friendships of pleasure.
Yep.
It doesn't take as much to do that. And friendships of utility, you can have a ton of those. But, you're not giving to that friend what you're giving to the friend who you're really in a strong relationship
right.
with, I mean, if you think about it, analogous to romantic relationships. So, if you've got a girlfriend, or a spouse, or whatever, somebody who's the central person, and you think you're going to stay with them because you actually like them, and there's a lot you have in common with them.
Right.
Well, you couldn't possibly be chatting with all these other fans the same way that you do with them, because if you did, that girlfriend or spouse would be like, what the hell's going on here? Justifiably so, right? And even if you wanted to do that, you wouldn't have enough time to do that and practice and market and do all the other stuff that you need to do. So you have to it's okay too, this is the thing that Aristotle's saying, it's okay to have these boundaries that depend on what kind of relationship we have with people.
And that's something that is really hard to work out when you're a young musician coming up, is understanding. I mean, I guess if you were to tell somebody straight out, I know, but to actually kind of think about it and kind of draw boundaries. But it's interesting now you're kind of starting to talk about something that we've gone over lately, which is kind of the emotions, which I think is important. And it's a very, I'm sure in all fields, but in music, it's a very touchy subject, that this whole notion of belittling.
Yeah. Or slighting is another way of translating it. The Greek word is olegoria, which means like a lessening. Treating somebody as less than they think they have coming to them.
And a huge thing I see, especially in younger players, is maybe the jealousy, insulting other players or other bands behind their back, or to them, or maybe being passive aggressive, or one of the things that I find most there's insult, right? There's insult, contempt,
spite,
and spite.
Like just screwing with people because you don't care, and you get in their way, and like somebody who wrecks your equipment, for example, because think about it. Let's say you have a roadie who had a bad day and they couldn't care less about your equipment. Now you can't play. Aristotle would say, well, you're justifiably angry at them because they showed you spite,
And that's the one thing, but I don't want to cut you off, but you said something interesting. You take a certain interest, I know you know a lot about different philosophers, but why Aristotle for anger?
Oh, so that's kind of a long answer. I should preface this by saying, why did I get so interested in anger in the first place? Because I've been a very angry person for a long part of my life, and I found that certain philosophical treatments of anger gave me some perspective that I could use to become a less angry person. So Aristotle was one of them, in part because he has one of the most complex, robust theories of what anger is, how it works in ancient philosophy. And it actually stands toe-to-toe with stuff that's contemporary in anger management literature now. The Stoics are another group that I also like to use, because now I do a lot of anger management, coaching and stuff like that, and presentations. And the Stoics have some great techniques to use, but Aristotle has a great theory about why we get angry. And like you said, a lot of it seems, when it's explained, to be kind of commonsensical. Well, Aristotle's the guy who made it common sense, and it is helpful, even if it is something that deep down we do know, to have somebody else come in and say, here's how it actually does work, because it provides us a little bit more confidence that maybe we're on the right track, and making us think about it. You're talking about this. So, when you're actually thinking about something a lot of the time, you're more mindful of it. You're paying attention to these features of situations that you otherwise might let slide. So when you understand Aristotle's theory of anger, it helps you out in personal relationships, it helps you in business relationships, because it helps you understand what's going on in social media, and how not to get sucked into Facebook flame wars.
Yes.
Because you can see what's going on. It also helps you with students, right? Because
yes,
I know as a instructor, when I first started out, I used to get kind of ticked off with students and some of the nonsense that they pull. In part, I think, because I took it a bit personally, and I also I thought of myself as sort of like defending philosophy. Why aren't you serious about this stuff? And then, with time and perspective came the realization that it didn't have anything to do with me at all, so I didn't need to get angry about it. And the reason why they weren't really into philosophy was because I wasn't doing a very good job in making it interesting to them. And once I started doing that, students, started responding a lot better. I imagine you probably went through a similar learning curve when you first started teaching.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, and a lot of the same stuff where... I know for me, for the fundamentals, you have somebody coming into a place like Berklee College of Music.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of them have a lot of things going on, but they're missing some of the fundamentals that will probably be important to them growing themselves.
Yeah.
And almost being apologetic when I first started teaching there of, wow, I'm going to walk into this class and teach major scales.
Okay.
And how to look at them. And, of course, then the students looked uninterested because...
major scales are kind of boring.
They are kind of boring, but once you get into them and start talking about pitch organization from the pitch set, well, that gets really intense, especially when you start demonstrating. But before that, it's like, I don't know that good, but I really want to move on to this.
Yeah.
And I remember just like with the fundamentals, feeling that they didn't think what I was saying was important, or maybe I took it personal in the sense of, wow, when I was younger, the greatest guitarist in Boston, if they told me just sit there for 10 hours a day with the pick and play a quarter note, I would think it was important.
Yeah.
Because I look up to that person so much.
Yeah.
And then after a while, it's kind of, I grew into understanding. There was a learning curve.
Yeah. There's a feedback loop, too, because this comes back to Aristotle and ethos, and the ethos that we project as instructors. So, an audience too. So, when we approach our students as the beginners that they are, or sometimes intermediate people, and we understand that not only do they not know information, they also don't really understand what they're being educated in yet, right? Because they're not where we are.
That's true, actually, yeah.
And so they may have some real passion for some of the things that we're into, but it's often for different reasons.
Right.
And it's up to us to connect with them as the audience, right? If we don't reach the audience, it's not the audience's fault. It's really our fault for not doing the work. And so, like in my field, right, what I do is I take complex philosophical concepts from classic texts, and I explain them so that people who are not, in my field can understand them. And I do it in a way that doesn't talk down to people, doesn't water the stuff down. I still keep some rigor and some standards, but I stretch so that I can explain. If I need to talk to a bus driver, I can explain it in terms of bus driving.
That's
if I'm
it.
going to talk to a musician, I use examples from music. Fortunately, I like music, so I've got lots of examples.
Yeah.
And it's up to me to do that. And if I don't want to do that, so think about, again, ethos, right? If I'm doing that, the students respond generally positively. A few of them may no matter what I do, think I'm full of crap. And,
right.
That, I don't have to worry about them, because the other students will tell them they're wrong, right? I let the other students be my advocates, because if I tell them they're wrong, they're not going to listen to me. But
interesting, yeah.
When the students can tell that you actually care about your topic,
yep,
know about your topic, and care about their development,
yeah,
they respond positively. Classes suddenly become much more enjoyable, even if you don't get through all the material, right?
Right.
And you start looking forward to it. Your teaching becomes better in that ethos and also emotional way, and it just builds. I mean, you look at one way to see how this works is look at people's rate my professors things. Some people seem to be in a negative feedback loop. The students have the impression that they don't want to teach these students, or they're talking down to them, or they're arbitrary, or they don't really care about the students. And when students talk about you that way, and the other students come in with that, expecting that, they're going to be a hard audience, right? So when you've already built up some of a reputation of, hey, this guy cares, he wants you to learn. I wasn't really into Aristotle at first, but he made it enjoyable, and I got something out of it and realized that it could apply to my life. When the next student looks at Rate My Professor, they come in primed to have that experience, and so then you provide it, and there's nothing fake going on there, right?
No.
But it's like I said, it's a feedback loop, and that's very important. That's ethos at work, and it can only happen. Rhetoric is all about being attentive to the fact that you do have an audience, that you're not just presenting to fellow academics.
Well, exactly. And that's why I kind of started this off with, which kind of rhetoric are we talking about here?
Yeah.
In the example of somebody just starting the music business might be in their own head like, well, I'm really good, I'm just going to show these flashy videos.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they're not considering what they're projecting, their ethos, or any of that stuff. And if you start to think about
let's talk about the other two kinds of rhetoric and how they might come in.
Oh, yeah.
So, ceremonial rhetoric, or Aristotle's term, epideictic rhetoric, that is where you're essentially, what he says is you're praising or you're blaming. You're talking about the good points or the bad points of something. And so, let's say you were writing a blog piece about why, one of the perennial issues, like in the early 80s in metal, who's the better band, Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, right? And there were other things too, like Rat or Motley Crue.
Right. Oh yeah. Right.
And there were some cases where it was pretty easy. Crocus or Dokken? Dokken blew him away. That was the end of Crocus pretty much. But
yeah.
So if you're saying why, let's say you take the Iron Maiden side.
Okay.
I think there was a hit parader actually where it was like Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest. There are articles on that.
Yeah.
Now, what you would do is you would explain what's so great about Iron Maiden, and you might also say why that's better than what's going on with Judas Priest, or you could even say how great Judas Priest is, and then say why Iron Maiden is even better, because that's an argumentative strategy that can pay some dividends. Right?
That's sure.
But that's ceremonial rhetoric. Or like when you go to think about award shows, right? What's going on with inducting somebody to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? You're praising them. There's a little speech, and then usually the band plays, unless it's Kiss, because they can't decide.
They can't decide.
Now, that's a good lead-in to another thing. So judicial rhetoric, we think about that as involved with law courts, and that's the way Aristotle primarily thought about that.
Yeah.
But whenever we're saying that somebody has done something wrong, and that they're to blame, and that they should be punished, or that somebody, when we're defending, we're saying, no, they didn't do something wrong, then we're talking about that. So when we talk about something like, they should have patched things up and made sure that Peter Criss and Ace Frehley were welcome so that they could play, and that whoever was involved with it, I don't know whether it was Simmons or Stanley or somebody else, they were at fault for doing that. Well, we're engaging in judicial rhetoric. We're not in front of a law court. We're in front of what we call a court of public opinion.
Exactly. Right, and doesn't this carry off into things like when bands split? We've seen a lot of bands split. Like, we had talked about briefly Queensryche.
Yeah.
There became the Jeff Tate's Queensryche, and then Queensryche with a new lead singer. But it was, it was kind of like,
which one is the real Queensryche?
And then what happened? And Jeff Tate wasn't the bad guy. He would say, "This is what happened. This is, And then they're like, "Well, Jeff Tate pulled a knife."
Yeah.
And it was this back and forth. And I gotta say, as a big Queensryche fan, I don't know
who to believe. Yeah.
But that's exactly. I mean, I think that's the quintessential metal. We were talking about even Dio, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I tend to believe Dio.
I do too.
Myself.
And that's why we all love him. He
projects ethos, though. That's he is a hardworking guy who tells it straight. He'll, if you ask him a real question, he'll think about it and then give you an answer, unless he's got one immediately. So he's able to project. You watch interview after interview, he comes across the same way. He's not erratic or.
No, that's true. Did you ever see the one where he's on the tour bus and he's having a beer?
Yes.
And they handed him every album he played on. And he goes,
yes. Oh, yeah. That was. And some of them he's like, this one was crap.
Yeah. Quite frankly. And he goes, oh, that's great. We see the guitarist on the front cover. There's a picture of me over there. And then and he'd say, that live album, don't buy it. This is the one.
Yeah.
And then even I was a big fan of Sacred Heart.
Oh yeah. And I remember them.
The Dio record, and he was like, I thought he was going to trash that album, and they handed it to him. He goes,
"That's a pretty good album.
That's a great album.
Yeah,
I love that album." And he goes, I like this. This is great." And then Lock Up the Wolves, which I also really loved, but it kind of fell through the cracks.
Yeah,
he had a lot of nice.
All young players on that one.
And I became friends with Rowan.
Okay.
And he's sweet, but he's from he's our age, He was on that album when he was 18.
Oh wow.
And but he got along with Dio. He said, I geeked him out about, I said, what was he like? Was he hard? He goes, no, he was the most supportive guy. Very, very honest, but very supportive. And me being 18 and but then I sent him that interview, and he just wrote back laughing. That's Ronnie. Being honest.
Well, it's interesting because in when he's talking about Rainbow, he says that in interviews again, he said that he learned a lot from watching how things were set up, and he learned a lot of what not to do, not just with fans but also with fellow musicians.
Talk about Blackmore.
Yeah, well, because Blackmore's almost at an extreme in terms of. So if we think in terms of like relating to audience, Blackmore projects that he's doing something very important, and he can't be bothered with all of you plebeians out there, and he'd be just as happy playing to himself.
Well, it's
the rest of
Well, let's talk about, like, this is a question for you.
Okay.
So, Richie Blackmore's somebody that shows a lot of contempt to his fans.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And that's a form of, it's one of the 3 forms of belittling in the anger section of Aristotle, the second
book.
The
Rhetoric.
The Rhetoric. So, this is really fascinating for me because, I remember he said, on the interviews, he said, that interview for the DVDs, just in a pub drinking, right? And he said, I hate America. He goes, I hate America. I wanted Deep Purple to have a second guitar player. Yeah. And that guy can go. He goes, I like history. That's why I like Europe. And he goes, I went to Hollywood once and they admitted me because I was depressed and I can't do it. And I'm watching this as, an American, I guess.
Yeah.
And going,
and somebody who likes his music.
And somebody who was a big fan of his, but everything he said, he had very few positive things to say about people or countries and for somebody that's, this is terrible ethos, but would Aristotle make a distinction between why it's succeeding for Richie Blackmore?
Well, it didn't really succeed for him. It didn't succeed in 2 ways. One is if he really was genuine about he hates America, he was still stuck touring in America.
Which is true, yeah.
So he had to have a whole suckfest going from city to city, and he did it with, I assume, with Deep Purple when they got back together in the 80s. Rainbow toured around quite a bit.
And he always looked, I remember the big thing, I remember Paul Gilbert in an interview saying, the first time he saw Van Halen was like mind-blowing because he was used to Richie Blackmore scowling on stage and looking like he was not any fun. Yeah. And Eddie Van Halen smiling, going, this is the best job in the world, and really connecting with that. So, with the dull stage presence of scowling, is that some form of contempt to the audience?
Well, it can be. There's another thing too where if it's something that's expected, right? If it's like part of the culture, and this is where going from one culture to another could be a real problem. I don't know enough about Japanese culture, especially Japanese metal culture, to make any sort of speculations, other than it's got to be quite a bit different than America and quite a bit different than Europe.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of bands who didn't seem to connect well with fans, either in Britain or in the rest of Europe or in the States, and made a killing out in Japan. There was something that clicked, and then they'd come over here and they just couldn't sell a lot of stadiums.
You're talking bands from Japan, or you're talking bands from here?
No, bands from here and from Britain.
Absolutely. Remember in the 80s.
If you were big, and you could also go out to Japan and you would sell out. That's why there was made in Japan.
Yes.
And then there was Made in Japan, and then there was Unleashed in the East.
Yes.
And Tokyo Tapes and
Beast from the East. The document.
Oh
Beast from the East.
That's right. Yeah. Unleashed in the East was Priest.
Yeah.
There must have been a ton of bands who were successful in these venues. But then there were some who they really made it much more out in Japan, and I'm not sure what happened there. But there was probably a difference in how they related to their audience. Going back to the anger thing, so if you expect people to kind of treat you like crap, you're not going to get angry at it the way that a person who expects something different will. So if you don't have, if you're used to everybody scowling like Richie Blackmore, then it probably won't tick you off, right? But,
okay, yeah.
But then you've got the problem of other guitarists show up who aren't doing that sort of thing. And I think Blackmore must have been an anomaly anyway, because I can't imagine that the guys Tony Iommi, you don't think of him as super gleeful, right?
Right.
But he was from the same era.
Exactly.
Uriah Heep was around at the same time. They seemed like some kind of fun guys. So I don't know about the Blackmore thing. And then later on, he's with Rainbow. So he's in the same era that Motorhead's out there. Mm-hmm. They were a fun band, right?
Oh yeah, I got to see them a couple times.
Yeah.
And so you're back to, I guess it would be habit, right? It can habit be an expectation Okay, I know Blackmore scowls all the time.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not like Eddie Van Halen showed up and he hates Boston or he hates New York and he's unhappy to be there. Well, the audience would go to expect him to smile and jump around, and if he's just, we've seen off performances, and that does tend to make people angry.
Yeah.
Like, I paid good money.
Well, because the idea is, I've seen them play for somebody else, and they played their heart out for them. Why are they giving us the crap show, right? If and so the same sort of thing. Like if let's say you and I are having a conversation about Aristotle, right?
Yeah.
And I just kind of give you, a one-liner and brush off, and then you see me turn around to some other guy, and he asks me about Aristotle, and I talk for half an hour with him. You're like, what the hell?
Oh yeah, that's a prime example.
Yeah,
and I've seen that so much, and I've reacted to that so much. So that's not your character because I just saw you act differently. So it must be me, or it must be you're upset at me, or
you think less of me.
You think less of me. Well, that's what it comes down to.
That's contempt. That's kataphronesis in Greek. And there are some people that have tendencies to reading that into all sorts of situations where that's not really the case.
You're talking about, so there's contempt given by the person.
Yeah, and then there's contempt perceived when sometimes it's not actually there. Like we talked about forgetting people's names. You, like me, are bad with remembering names and associating them with faces. And so there's always the risk of alienating somebody because we don't remember their name. I used to just do the "hey you" thing. That doesn't really work well. So now I just say I have a problem with associating names with faces. What's your name?
Yeah.
And people are okay with that. But if you forget somebody's name, and then especially if you remember the other person's name,
that's right,
they get ticked off, and understandably so, because they feel like you're treating them like they don't matter,
And this is a huge thing in any business, but to go back to the music business, what people should understand, it's and you've got me thinking because I've been into this the whole way, but now contempt, especially now when I'm writing, informal emails or informal messages, and I write somebody's name, I make sure that it's capitalized now. Because, this sounds really nitpicky, so it's like Greg with a small g.
Yeah.
Well,
bad grammar or punctuation is sort of a sign of hastiness, that you're not really interested in you're not willing to give the time to write a proper email. We don't like it when students do this, right? That's text message kind of email, you instead of you.
And these are habits that society is forming. But absolutely, it's I've been taking of course autocorrect's a nightmare. So but all the things that I'm starting again, we're back to I know what being rude to somebody is, Greg, but. But now it's taken on a whole new thing.
There's dimensions to it that when you have a theory to bring to it, you start noticing more.
You start noticing more, and then I think the first thing that
just like with music and music theory, right? When you come to a piece, and now you actually have some understanding about what the hell is going on there, or music history, how the piece got to be that way, it's like a whole world opens up to you.
And that's what you want to try to make, back to teaching, make the student understand, but there has to be a degree of making them discover it.
Yeah,
right? I don't know if this
agency on their part.
Agency on their part. I don't know. It was big in the music business in the '90s, but Zen was so the in thing in the '90s.
Yeah.
And for some reason there was, the big book was Zen and the Art of Motorcycles.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the musicians in the 90s were reading Zen and the Art of Archery, which was like this thing.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And the whole thing to that book is this guy goes to study with an archery master, and he's being shown the techniques, and he's practicing, but there's this thing, he gets so mad at his teacher saying, "Oh, I can't do this, and you showed me, and I've practiced it."
Yeah.
And I guess the point is the teacher ends up saying, "Well, this is a leap you have to make yourself. I can't make you do that."
Yeah.
So but that was a big thing there. But now kind of thinking, you know, you put enough in, they discover. You know, my job is not to go, here's where you put your fingers. You know, you're well way beyond that, or this is how you play this, and just do that. If you learn to be creative with, and I think this is true with language.
Yeah.
You know, you could teach grammar, and but
yeah,
you know, and you and I probably had similar education.
You can teach different kinds of style too. You know, and you can give students a good sense of who they ought to read, who not to model themselves after, who they might, what aspects of works are really worth attending to. I mean, the same thing with music appreciation.
Yeah, and of course, you know, I have my opinions dragged in there, like, you know, not good or bad opinions, but things that I think if I see a student struggling with, say, variation in time and improvisation, there's a specific person or there's a specific recording I might have that specific student listen to, as opposed to others. So I think that's a huge thing is,
well, you know, part of what you're talking about there is to bring in another concept, right? Aristotle has this what he calls a virtue called phronesis, and we translate it as prudence. Not that useful of a term these days. Practical wisdom is another way. So wisdom involved in doing things, in making choices, in figuring out how to order things, you know, what to make a priority, how to fix things, right? And practical wisdom is very important for situations where we need to exercise judgment, where there aren't hard and fast rules. There are reasons why we say you need to listen to this piece, or this would be useful to you for you to look at, or this would be a good exercise for you to do. We can give reasons, but they're not reasons that everybody would apply to everybody universally, right? It's how we apply things to particulars, and that's really important in education, because it's not cookie cutter, one size fits all. One of the reasons why they need us still, instead of making it all computer algorithms, is because we have developed not an infallible sense, but some decent sense about when to apply something and when not to. That a beginning teacher probably doesn't have, you know. And it's not something that we were born to teach and we had it in us. No, we learned it sometimes by prescribing the wrong thing to students and seeing it didn't work out, and then say, I'm not going to do that again.
No, and I remember, well, maybe, but, you know, like, do you think some of that has to do with the lack of confidence in teaching?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, so when you first come out and start teaching, and you don't have a lot of experience, I'm not going to generalize about all teachers, because there are some types. There's some people who come in and no matter what, they always succeed. They're such outliers, you know, that we don't have to worry about them. And then there's some people that are like equally outliers because they're such terrible teachers, they're never going to be any good. But those are pretty rare. And there's some people who are too confident, right? Sometimes because it's masking some insecurities.
Yeah.
But they're too confident, and they often get themselves in trouble, right? And then there's the ones who kind of lack confidence, in part because they're not quite sure what they're doing, you know. And I think for some beginning teachers, they're so worried about appearing, well, this is the ethos thing, so worried about appearing like they know everything, because they're worried if the students realize that they don't know everything, it's going to be pandemonium. The students are going to revolt, and they're going to be like, this is bullshit, we're not listening to anything. And that's not what happens. I mean, it could, but it's so rare that happens.
And you hit the nail on the head, because
and being able to tell your students, I don't know, that can often be very powerful, right?
And that's exactly, I think, what I point. You know, I remember coming, you know, when I first started teaching at Berklee, I was already playing on the road for 10 years, and then going in there into a school, I had a perception of, oh, this is what's cool to like, this is what's not cool to like, I'll keep my mouth shut about this stuff. And then if a student were to ask me a question or know something...
Like, what were examples of stuff that you kept under wraps?
Oh, this is a great one. I remember there's a shockingly a lot of people are like, what? An unreal guitar album is Michael Bolton's Sole Provider.
Okay.
Steve Lukather, Dan Huff, and Mike Landau. I mean, the solos are killer, the tones are killer, the comping is killer. You know, is that the album? I think Steve Gadd's on too.
Okay.
It's just a killer, and the rockers on that album. Because I think Michael Bolton's he was with Bruce Kulick in Blackjack, and I think when he sings the rock and stuff, it's killer. He's an AOR singer. But I remember kind of saying, when students were like, well, what's about like with comping and what's a good example of a very singing melodic solo with not a lot of notes? Well, that album has all of it. And I remember thinking like, wow, I wonder if it gets around that I'm talking about Michael Bolton because, and that's such a, now I look back and say that's pathetic because, but it goes along with what you said about me being okay with
developing confidence in yourself and the fact that you're not going to lose your audience.
That you're not going to lose your audience, and even I'll have a sense of humor about my strengths and or weaknesses. I have some students that excel in like shred guitar, and it was something kind of scary at first, and I remember like deliberately giving them assignments. This was talking at the beginning of like Herbie Hancock piano solos that I knew they weren't going to be able to handle, to like bring them down.
Yeah.
And now it's like now it doesn't bother me at all. But I have to admit, looking back, and I the weird thing is I didn't realize it. I just kind of reacted the way I did. Looking back, I'm going, well, I was just really insecure, and I thought, well, if I show weakness, then because my mentors when I was younger they never did anything wrong.
They probably did, and we just didn't notice.
Well, they said, it was kind of like the teacher's like, in my time, I don't ever get lost in a form, and that's something like musicians when the band starts, when the drummer's not playing just a straight beat, and everybody knows where the time is, but nobody's telling you where the time is on the bandstand. Yeah. Well, that's a hard lesson to learn. And then I used to go, to one of the guys I was studying with, it was such a catastrophe. I got lost in the form 3 times in front of the audience. Yeah, well, I never do that. It's like, and then now that I'm older, I know that they did.
Yeah.
But it was that now I'm okay with like, hey, don't worry about you're 19 or 20. Don't worry about that you don't have that. That took me till I was 30 and I'm okay with that now. And I think I teach better now because it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't hurt my whatever. It doesn't make me think that I'm going to go home and quit because I should be the should statements, right?
Yeah.
But I think you nailed it when you said that. It's kind of admitting, being like, I don't know the answer to that, or I've never heard of that. You've never heard of this, or you've never heard this record? No, I just never got around to it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much stuff out there that it's impossible for any of us to master our disciplines' repertoires.
Oh.
When I go into a library, an academic library, and I go to the philosophy section, stacks of books, and I used to get depressed. I would say, I'm never going to have the time to read more than a tiny portion of these, and I know that when I read stuff, I often have to reread because I'll lose track of paying attention and can't remember what I read. And so I'm never going to make it through even like probably this shelf and really understand the stuff. So, I mean, look at this. I can't possibly make a dent in my profession. And, part of what helps is realizing everybody's in that boat. Even the people we look up to as like, they're superstars, they're in that boat. You talk with them and you'll say, have you read so-and-so? And they'll say, No, I haven't. Are they worth reading? And then you're like, how'd you not read this? And that's kind of a nice thing to introduce perspective. It helps you out, afterwards. And I mean, the same thing with I'm sure you've interacted with some guitarists that you looked at as like being like superstars and that you were in awe of, and then you find out they can't play this lick.
A lot of them I was fortunate, as I get older, to become friends in texting terms with some people that got me started playing guitar.
Yeah.
And the records, we had the poster. I had the posters on my wall, and it was like bigger than life. And now, even the ones, I still think the world of them, but they're so humble. I mean, like the good ones that stay in touch, they're just like,
Yeah.
and it's like, I remember
what genuine humility is? This is actually something I think would be really useful for your students. So, there's, we talk about humility, and it gets presented as like, you're gonna, I'm no good, If you are good, it's not humble to tell people that you're not good, to pretend that you have less talent than you have, right?
Right.
But humility is genuine self-knowledge. It's realizing how good you are,
okay,
and then being able to put that into perspective in relation, not to like, I'm not as good as this superstar. Well, of course you're not as good as that superstar, right? Because they're a superstar. But being able to look at it sort of an objective way, and realize that what good that you do possess, what talents you have cultivated, and what discipline you've built up, it's finite, and you can do some real good with it.
Yeah.
I think of music brings people joy. It helps people work their way through lots of crappy situations. There's all sorts of benefits that come with music, and the musician can provide that. Now, if you're thinking about something that would be, the sort of typical metal song where you might have a 5-piece band, and you just play drums, you're not the whole show, right? And humility is knowing you're not the whole show, but being realistic about it. So, somebody who is at a high level of competence, humility for them means admitting that they're at a high level of competence, that they're pretty good at what they do.
Right. That's really interesting, because that's not what we think of when we hear that word.
No, we think of being self-effacing.
Self-effacing shows some humility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like giving in to other people. Like, so here'd be a great example, right? Somebody who's genuinely a star-level player and hasn't squandered their talent or kind of, pissed it away through not following up on it, letting themselves go to pot, they are not going to be threatened whatsoever by somebody new coming in and playing well. They're going to feel joy at seeing the new person doing well. Right. So when somebody says show some humility with respect to your elders or something like that, they're basically saying don't show your elders up.
Right.
And if those elders are really worth something, they're going to be realistic about their talents and what it is that they have to bring. And they may even say stuff like, I realize the new generation, they're into a different kind of music, and I'm, things like I'm a dinosaur, right? And maybe for a while they are. I mean, some dinosaurs go on forever, like Lemmy did. But, to tell somebody show humility is essentially to say, hide yourself. Don't make anybody else feel uncomfortable. That's not humility.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting, because this is the first I'm hearing of this. I had the wrong notion of that word.
So Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about something that we translate as great-souledness, or magnanimity is another way of framing it. Sometimes it just translated as pride, but like rightful pride.
Yep.
And he says that so Aristotle's moral theory, generally you have a virtue that's in the middle, that's a habitual state.
Yep.
And then you have one vice on one side, which is too much, another vice on the other side, not enough, right? So like anger, for example. Aristotle thinks you should get angry at some stuff, right? Somebody comes along and kicks your mom in the teeth, you should probably get mad, right? Now, if you're getting mad at everybody, that's too much. If you're not getting mad, that's also a problem. Oh. So the person who is great-souled, according to Aristotle, it deserves great things.
Yep.
They really have talent. They're really great at what they do, and they expect it. They expect other people to acknowledge it. They're not going to make a big thing of it. If people don't give them what they want, they're not going to get all upset about it. Then there's the other side, which is those who are vain. They they're really don't, they're not as deserving. They could be deserving of some stuff, but they want more. So somebody who's like an intermediate level player who wants to be treated as if they're an expert, right?
Right.
And then there's people who are on the other side where they really have something. He calls this small-souledness, or being self-effacing. They really have something to offer, and they downplay it, they hide it. You know, that's a problem.
And I've seen that, on both ends.
Yeah, and then there's another thing where you don't, he calls it modesty. You don't really deserve that much. Like we talked about this before. So I'm an amateur musician, right? I have a banjo and I play rock songs on it. I'm too lazy to learn how to play bluegrass stuff. And I'm fine with that, because I'm not into bluegrass. But
right.
I can play some Motorhead and some Scorpion stuff and some Judas Priest stuff, and it sounds a little weird on a banjo. And quite frankly, the reason why I did that is I was too lazy to get a guitar, and I had a banjo. So and I'm probably never going to be even at an intermediate stage, right? And so I can understand that and be okay with it and just admit it. That's modesty, right? Not deserving of much, and I understand it. Now Bella Fleck comes in, and he says, let's have the best person play the banjo. I'm going to hand him my banjo. I'm not going to say no. I should have a chance. No, it's Bella Fleck.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I'm at a stage now where I do get asked.
Yeah, it's more difficult for you.
It's really
because
difficult.
You're higher up, so you actually do have to think a lot more about what do you deserve,
Yeah,
and where do you fit into this? And it's more complicated because it's not like there's a single spectrum of musical talent, right?
No, it's just not at all.
So like or like games have levels, right? You level up to the next level, like Guitar Hero, right?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work that way. It's almost like it goes off in different directions. So the kind of talent that, let's say voice stuff, right? So the kind of talent that Dio had is not the same kind of talent that Rob Halford has.
That's right.
They're both great. I would say Dio is better myself, but in saying that, it's kind of tough to say it because in his way, Rob Halford really is pretty awesome.
Oh, he's
still.
He's Rob Halford.
Yeah.
It's not like, there's a Steve Perry clone. Like, that was happening so much. Like, this guy's a great Steve Perry clone, post-Steve Perry. So I think he was an art into himself.
Yeah.
Because nobody sang like that. Who's going to sing like that?
Well, the only person who came kind of close is Jeff Tate, right?
Well, yeah.
With the range.
Queen of the Reich.
Yeah.
The EP. Yeah.
But all of it. But Jeff Tate didn't have the growl.
No.
No,
I always thought Rob Halford was a machine. I always described him as a complete, I see him live and go, I'm just like, you see him live and go, wow, that's real.
Yeah.
And, where I am, I don't think of things as better. I get asked a lot, and I get in these, it was funny today, there was I don't know, for some reason there was all these debates on Facebook about, somebody went to Berklee and got offended that people around Boston are saying, well, you go to Berklee, you're not the real deal, you don't have no feel, and the conversation started out like, I played with two Berklee people, it was really robotic. And, and so it's a whole thing where I would kind of join in and, say, well, wait a minute, I think
Berklee students or Berklee professors?
No, it was more, it's Berklee affiliated, or students. But here we're talking about, I'm like, well, I think you're attributing these two cases to the wrong thing, right? Yeah. Maybe it's not Berklee, maybe it's these people, because I played with people that are uneducated, that had no feel, but B.B. King was uneducated and had it right, and I don't think it matters. And just back to the point of betters, it's kind of like when people make a claim that, Mark Knopfler couldn't sing from Dire Straits. Well, he did have the quintessential Scottish blue-collar voice. He's not going to be Rob Halford. And so I tend to see things like that because I start to realize, at least in my thing, is I'm really great at, I'm the best at being me. And, and it's even, people will compare, it's like, well, what about this famous person, I had a student actually say a notable guitar player would just like destroy me, and I said, well, at what they would do, but if that guitarist had to improvise over the tunes that I've written, they'd fall on their face.
Yeah.
And it's not about that. It's not like, and I keep saying, well, what's your criteria?
Well, so I think part of what's going on there is the beginner level person in thinking about things they have the wrong model. They think that it is something like a video game where you level up to certain places, and it's all on one continuum, and they don't understand there's all these dimensions.
There's all these exactly,
and there's also contingency too, which is that so maybe in some respects on their ground, a great guitar player taking Yngwie Malmsteen, right? So quintessential classical person. If that's what you're doing, he's going to destroy you.
Yes.
Now, if he's hungover, if it's a bad day, maybe he won't. Maybe he doesn't operate well. I don't know, because I don't know Yngwie Malmsteen. And the same thing could happen to you too. I mean, you could. Right. The students often look at information that doesn't. It's just not representing enough cases. And they draw these sweeping conclusions, right?
Right.
And audiences do this too, right? They go to a show,
yes,
and they're like, I saw that band once. They sucked. Well, okay, so maybe the singer was like strung out, that day, and the guitarist was, he had a cold and he took cold medicine, so he's
exactly.
Yeah, and that was the one day that they sucked. The rest of the tour was amazing.
And that's to be accounted for. But I think if you're talking about like Yngwie Malmsteen, and you said it right. If you're gonna, but like we have people say Yngwie Malmsteen blows away Ritchie Blackmore. Now, okay, you're talking about.
Well, it depends on what. See, you got to clarify what blows away in what respect.
Right. So if you're going to say, well, he can play faster than Ritchie Blackmore.
Yeah.
Well, but that's not necessarily better. That's just faster.
Yeah.
If Ritchie Blackmore's goal was to play that fast, he would have worked towards that, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to say David Gilmour. You're not going to say like
Gary Moore.
Or Gary Moore is a great example.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of stuff that he played was kind of slow, but there's a feel to it that. I'm not knocking Yngwie Malmsteen.
No, we're not.
I don't think he has a lot of that kind of feel.
He's got great feel in what he does. I just think he plays like his personality, bombastic, and I love those records.
Yeah.
But to compare, say, someone like, I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Stern, fusion guitar players, like rock blues with burning jazz lines. He played with Miles when Miles was doing the rock thing. But, those are, Mike Stern is mainly an improviser, where Yngwie Malmsteen claims he improvises, but it's just, he's not, he's just kind of like playing licks over his tune, and it's great.
Yeah.
But they could never switch positions. If Yngwie went on the Miles gig, Miles would, if he were still here today, Miles would just pull the horn out and go, what the hell are you playing? Get out, and that's not, it's not putting him down, it's just,
it's different functions.
You can be on the functions exactly.
And to swing back, because we should bring this to like a nice, neat close before we run out of camera time. So the Aristotle and friendship thing, right?
Yeah.
We need different kinds of relationships. A full life and full professional life encompasses a number of different relationships. We don't want to make them all into, these are the best relationships in my life, and everything is completely wonderful, because that's a fantasy land. And pretty soon, if you have that mentality, you're going to get screwed. People are going to take advantage of you, or you're going to expect too much of people, and they're going to let you down, and then you're very upset. It's better to some of these relationships are relationships where people are getting use out of each other, and that's okay.
Right.
And when they stop being useful to each other, Aristotle says, then that friendship ends. So if you've got an agent, and that agent is not getting you bookings, you don't have to keep that agent. You don't have to feel guilty about that. You can say, look, this is business. If you've become great friends with them, then you can still stay great friends with them, right? And I think younger people, it takes a while to learn that lesson, you know?
That's huge. That's going to be a great. That's this Tuesday. Is that this Tuesday you're giving that?
Yeah.
I just think, and that's a distinction that even at my stage, it's going to be good for me to think about and kind of learn about, because we get it wrong a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's wildly wrong a lot.
Hopefully we get it. When we get it wrong, there's a couple things that are different, right? We get it wrong less often, hopefully. Yep. And when we get it wrong, we get it less wrong.
Yep.
And then we figure out how to unscrew it up quicker than
right.
Yeah. Those are. I often say to my students that ethics is primarily about what to do after you've managed to totally screw everything up.
All right.
That's not the whole of it, but it's an important part. And we say, being ethical, just do this, don't do that. Well, that's nice, but what if you've already done the thing that you're not supposed to do? How do you fix it? What if you've I don't know, let a friend down or something? How do you what's the best way to fix it in that case? Well, that's when ethics really starts becoming useful.
Yeah, that's great. But all these different, we only talked about a handful of topics, but how much they apply.
Yeah.
Just to the music business, to teaching, to discussing metal.
Yeah.
So I think you said it best. I think one of the first things I asked you was what I asked you at the beginning of this too, is, Greg, why are we listening to a Greek guy from 300 BC?
Yeah.
You said, well, we wouldn't if he wasn't still relevant.
Yeah. And another thing is too, so I've been reading Aristotle for more than 20 years. I don't even know when I first, probably as an undergraduate. I've been reading him in Greek for about 20 years.
Wow.
And part of what makes texts like this classics are, you're in the stage where you're like, wow, this is great stuff. I realize that I could have thought about this on my own, but Aristotle's making me think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I still do that myself, just like you. When you listen to some great guitarist, you hear you've listened to the album 100 times,
yeah,
but you still find new stuff. That's what makes things classics. That there's a kind of an ever renewed fertility to them. That's something you don't have in like textbooks, right? You read a textbook once, that's good. Maybe you go and consult it when you need to.
Right.
A lot of New York Times bestsellers, you don't need to read them more than once. Aristotle, Plato, Epictetus, these people, you can keep reading them the rest of your life because you're going to keep on finding new stuff. And I do.
Yeah, that's amazing to know. And but all the stuff that we've gone over so far has just been, I walk around and in my relationship with people, just when I walk down the street, being more mindful. Where you said it earlier when we were talking about like sloppy emails. But these are the kinds of things like
we're constantly sending messages to people by how we walk, how we behave, whether we make eye contact,
if we're gonna hold the door,
all that sort of stuff.
And all fun.
And we don't control all the message, but we can control some of it.
Yep.
If we don't want to appear to be jerks, we have some control over that.
That's right. And then the key thing to go back to, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the receiver.
Yeah.
You might be just something. You didn't do something like that had anything to do with contempt.
Yeah.
But they might take it as that.
That's always a possibility. Yeah.
But that's amazing. That was great. We covered so much.
Yeah.
Teaching, metal, even the professional musician. Things that I think is so important. I'm going to really use this in my teachings now. Is a lot of the stuff that I've been studying with you. But I think I'm really excited to. I hope people tune into the thing you're going to do Tuesday, because that's good. I'm going to be tuning in.
It'll be fun, yeah.
But they get to do a Q&A, right? Do they get to type a question?
Yeah, I'll talk for about maybe 25 minutes on the topic, and then it's all Q&A. They can, type in the question, or I think we might have another channel for doing that as well. I have Andy, my wife, help me out with it. She handles some of the...
Yeah.
It gets too complicated otherwise, when you're trying to talk and do the tech back end at the same time, and you can screw things up. It's sort of like, these people who play an instrument and sing and do both of them really well at the same time, like Lemmy did, but also like the guys in Kiss. I mean,
oh yeah, Paul Stanley.
Ace sang songs too, and so Gene Simmons sings a lot of the songs. That's tough to pull off, and especially like you mentioned, like losing the timing. Boy, if you're off on that,
Well, John Sykes is another one. He was on the Whitesnake album, but I've heard him with his trio live doing Whitesnake tunes, playing this complicated rhythm and singing like killer, like Coverdale's amazing, but like he can sing those songs too. And then playing these complicated rhythm parts that on guitar are hard in themselves. It's just one of those. Yeah. Wow, it's like that's because I don't sing that much. I do about that much singing, so I don't pretend to be like a Richie Sambora who's great at it. He's a great singer, and there's so many of those people. Gary Moore, was definitely one of them. And but that's another thing. Going back to I would never compare myself to, because I don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't. I just can appreciate those that are really.
Yeah, I think that's something that takes a long time to learn how to do. How not to compare yourself to.
Oh right, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
But great. That was better than I could have dreamt. That was really cool.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was so perfect. Thanks for you made a lot of the points really clear, and the questions I had for that. I think it's going to help people.
Yeah. So if I can get your students reading Aristotle,
yes,
that would be a lot of fun.
That would be a lot of fun. It would be really beneficial to them, I think.
Yeah.
It has to me. And we're dinosaurs, right? Is that what we are now?
Well, yeah, we're in our 40s, right? So,
yeah. Well, we feel
we're a different generation than our students.
But I'm just picking it up now. So, like I'm picking it up now, not when I was 20.
Yeah.
I did have a philosophy course, 2 of them, but no, I don't remember a thing from them.
Yeah. Well, most philosophy courses are taught pretty poorly, I think.
I think this guy was on autopilot.
Yeah. It's a big problem. That's one of my pet peeves is seeing other people teaching philosophy, sometimes even bitching about it. Oh, I gotta teach these students, and they don't want to read the text. Well, get them, you got a little bit of a role in that. You can get them to read the text. I don't seem to have that problem.
Well, and seeing you teach your classes too, on your YouTube channel. It's really cool because you'll say a concept and then you'll ask the class, can you think of a situation?
Yeah.
And then
they love that.
I love that because I'm like, oh yeah, what about this? And then you could be like, well, you're getting there, or that's a good one. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
And that gets me, well, I'm already ready to do it, but for somebody that's once you start saying, we have to study this old Greek guy, then all of a sudden when it's like, oh, this has to do with like what happened to me at lunch yesterday, or what happened, then it becomes something very real.
Or why my Facebook feed is so screwed up. Or
that's going to be a whole other thing. Oh yeah, and that's a lot when we were talking about the anger stuff.
Yeah.
It just goes on forever.
Best way to get something reshared, the people who do research on this found out, is to get people angry.
Oh God, yeah.
Out of all the emotions, if you want something reshared, it's not the stuff that makes people happy. They will reshare that, little fuzzy kittens and cute little puppies and stuff like that. But if you really want to get something viral, you get people pissed off.
But the people have to be primed to be pissed off, right?
Well, they're primed. Most people, I think, there's something out there that'll tick them off.
Well, especially now that the headlines have nothing to do with the article.
Yeah.
Somebody shared an NPR thing, and the thing, it had a picture of Yngwie on it, actually, and it says, in music, is it possible to be too good? And people are sharing it, and everybody's debating.
Oh my goodness!
But you read the article, and it doesn't say anything about that. It's this guy doesn't like Dream Theater, and he liked some other band, and he actually had no claim and no evidence for it. It was it sounded like a non-musician rambling about thoughts, and never said anything about being too good. But people are sharing it because of the headline and then fighting about the headline.
Yeah.
And when the article.
Yeah, comment feeds are kind of a cesspool, especially from I'm fortunate in that my YouTube, I don't have too much of that, because you look on some YouTube videos and boy is it toxic.
Yes. Yes, and I've seen friends. I've been pretty lucky. A few dings here and there, but you see people's YouTube channels, especially if they're talking.
Yeah.
And it's got to be tough for you because you might have somebody else that thinks they know so much, and well, why does this guy have so many views, and why does he have so many followers? You know what? You don't even know anything about Aristotle, or you don't know anything about. You're way off on this concept.
I've had some of that, yeah, and sometimes it's kind of that sour grapes thing, and it's really funny when it's from people who are like, this guy didn't even go to a good university or teach at a good university, and yeah, I didn't go to a top tier college.
I didn't either,
and yet I know Aristotle and you don't. I'm not talking about you, but the guy out there complaining about it, and there's a whole conversation there about what counts as quality, and but again, that has to be up for the audience to decide, not just the arbitrary marks about it. The music business is like that. You have people telling us what's good, but fans can tell when something's being marketed, but it's not very good. They don't respond to it after a while.
Well, there's definitely the distinction between the person that's being willing to be told what for example, there's certain shows that or certain articles will say this is truly great, and people will talk about it. But if you're looking at you don't have to be musicians, a sensitive layman. It's a great opinion to have valued, is somebody that's really into it and they're not fooled by they know in their heart what they like.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't have to be afraid of it, but it's kind of the people that are like, oh, did you read this? And isn't that interesting fact? And well, it's not a fact. It's it's like I always say, MTV, we never said hair metal until MTV wanted to bring their new brand of hair metal in, which was called grunge.
Oh yeah.
And so they coined hair metal to get rid of that stuff.
To distinguish it from grunge. Yeah.
Because here's our new thing where it's reactionary, where it's flannel, nobody's showering. It was really the Baroque period was the '80s in rock. Yeah. But I remember people say hair metal. I'm like, don't use that. That was coined by MTV to bring in their new thing, which you think is disgusting now. Nobody dresses like the '90s anymore.
Yeah.
And that was definitely oh, look at this, and you see these advertisements, and people would start making fun of it because it was kind of like, oh, this isn't happening anymore, so this is funny.
Yeah.
It wasn't funny 5 years ago when I was into it, but it's funny now because MTV says it's funny.
I think we may have lost that battle though with the current generation. It's tough to change linguistic developments.
Yeah.
We can rail against it, but that makes us the old guys, basically saying, "You damn kids, get off my lawn."
Which I usually sound like, yeah. But that's we're gonna have to talk about that some other time. That's really fascinating because I always say language is power.
Yeah.
And
we can shape it to some degree, and it doesn't work so well when we say don't talk like that. Making a prohibition, especially with the younger generation. I mean, you remember what it was like when we were the younger generation. We're like, I'm doing that, because the older people don't like it. We offer them better alternatives and make it clear to them why it's better. Then we get them to do it.
I usually try
the best is when we get them recruited as the ones who are going to come down on their fellow, younger people and say, don't do that, when we can get them to be doing the work for us.
That's right. Well, especially, it's like, if you're going to come in with, oh, well, look at it, they look ridiculous. Okay, well, there's a time and place, but, you're listening with your eyes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take that out of the equation. A thing that I used to do that was funny is Kip Winger did all this stuff, all the Winger songs, but just acoustic in his voice and like a piano. And like some of the ballads came out, and I used to play it, and people would go, "What is this? Is amazing." I go, it's these guys.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they were caught in but you know, even then
that's a good one, yeah.
Or Kip Winger solo albums is kind of like a heavier Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
And you know, he is brilliant. He's an amazing songwriter, super talented guy, but you know, once Beavis and Butthead made fun of him, he wasn't cool anymore. So there we go with the, you know, it doesn't take, you know, like, language is power or perception, especially to those who are waiting to be told what to do or what to think.
Yeah, and if we want the audience not to be like that, we have a role in cultivating them to some degree.
Yeah, right.
That's a good place to close.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks. You know, I really enjoyed chatting about all this.
I did too. It was great.
Yeah. And now I get to grill you about metal.
Yes.